In 1941, Yugoslavia was a diverse country composed of different ethnicities and religions, which had tried to remain neutral in World War II. However, its strategic position in the Balkans made it a key target for the Axis powers. Under pressure from Germany, the Yugoslav government agreed to join the Tripartite Pact, but a coup d'état led by pro-Allied officers provoked Hitler's fury. In response, Nazi Germany and its allies invaded Yugoslavia in April 1941, dividing its territory among various occupying nations. Serbia came under German control, while Croatia became a pro-German fascist state. Hungary, Bulgaria, and Italy divided other regions, consolidating a brutal occupation that brought persecution, repression, and extermination. The fate of Yugoslav Jews was especially tragic. Of the approximately 78,000 who lived in the country before the war, the majority were deported and killed in Nazi and collaborator concentration camps. How was it possible for such a diverse nation to end up in one of the worst massacres in history? Forced to yield, the beginning of Nazi yoke in Yugoslavia. The Yugoslav project emerged after the end of World War I in 1918, following the fall of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Serbia united with other territories, forming the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes, later called Yugoslavia. This country aimed to unite the so-called South Slavic peoples, integrating various ethnicities distributed in several regions. The Orthodox Serbs had Belgrade as their capital, the mostly Catholic Croats were in Zagreb, the Muslim Bosnians with Turkish ancestry in Sarajevo, the Catholic Slovenes in Ljubljana, the Orthodox Montenegrins in Cetinje, the Macedonians with Greek influences in Skopje, and the Albanian Muslim Kosovars in Pristina. Throughout the 20th century, the stability of the Kingdom of Yugoslavia was affected by tensions among the different communities, especially due to Serbian dominance over Croatia and Slovenia, whose inhabitants felt marginalized by Belgrade. The public administration was mostly controlled by Serbian officials, as were key sectors of the economy and finance. In the Royal Yugoslav Army, the Serbian presence was overwhelming. Of the 165 generals, only 4 did not belong to this group. These inequalities impoverished several regions and fostered the growth of nationalist movements opposed to the country's unity, such as the Croatian Ustaša or the Internal Macedonian Revolutionary Organization. The latter group was behind the assassination in Marseille, where King Alexander I was killed. The monarch's death left the throne without a leader, and the regency fell into the hands of Paul I until Prince Peter II reached the age of majority in 1941. At the beginning of World War II in 1939, Yugoslavia remained neutral, as the war had not reached its territory and its government maintained good relations with Germany. The country sold materials like lead and zinc to the Germans and in exchange obtained modern armaments, including Messerschmitt Bf 109 fighters. However, the Italian invasion of Greece in 1940 and the subsequent war between the two countries changed the situation. Against all odds, the Greeks managed to push back the Italian troops to Albania. This put Yugoslavia in the sights of 2 powers, Germany, which needed to pass through its territory to help Italy, and the United Kingdom, which saw in the Balkans an opportunity to destabilize the Third Reich. Initially, Yugoslavia tried to maintain neutrality in foreign policy. However, there were divided positions within the country. A sector led by Serbian General Milan Nedic supported an alliance with Italy to join the invasion of Greece and, in exchange, obtain the region of Thessaloniki. Meanwhile, many Croats, Muslims and Macedonians sympathized with the Axis. In contrast, Serbs, Montenegrins and Slovenes, along with the Orthodox Church, the high military command, the monarchy and the main financial sectors, favored the Allies. Even the Communist Party, led clandestinely by Josip Tito, also supported the West. This internal fracture worsened when, on November 27, 1940, Adolf Hitler demanded that the Yugoslav government clarify its neutrality, hinting at the possibility of allowing German troops to pass toward the Greco-Albanian border. From early 1941, Belgrade tried to delay any decision to avoid involvement in the war. However, on February 14th, President Dragiša Kvetković and Foreign Minister Alexander Cinka Marković travelled to Austria to meet with Joachim von Ribbentrop in Salzburg, while Regent Paul I went to Berchtesgaden to meet with Hitler. The Germans offered Yugoslavia to join the Tripartite Pact with Germany, Italy and Japan, in exchange for advantageous trade agreements, more influence in southern Europe, access to modern armaments and the cession of the port of Thessaloniki to the detriment of Greece. Although the proposal was tempting, the leaders hesitated, knowing that the population in Belgrade would react with rejection upon learning of it. In fact, before they made a decision, the Minister of War Dusan Pesic, close to the United Kingdom, resigned. After a month without receiving a response, Hitler lost patience and threatened to suspend the supply of materials to Yugoslavia from Czechoslovakia through the Skoda company. Additionally, on March 19th, he issued an ultimatum, demanding an immediate response. Finally, under this pressure, Kvetković and Cinka Marković travelled again to Austria that same week and, in a tense act, formalised Yugoslavia's adhesion to the Tripartite Pact. The coup d'état that changed Yugoslavia's destiny. At 2:20 in the morning of March 27, 1941, Yugoslavia suffered a coup d'état just 3 days after joining the Tripartite Pact. In Belgrade, General Dusan Simovic ordered the deployment of tanks and artillery through the city, while his troops secured the Ministry of War. At the same time, General Bora Mirković managed to rally the entire air force. Shortly after dawn, the insurgents had already occupied key offices, barracks and the post office. They also stormed the royal palace, removed Regent Paul I from power and forced the resignation of President Dragiša Kvetković and Foreign Minister Alexander Cinka Marković. Additionally, they captured Milan Stojadinović, the country's fascist leader, and sent him to the United Kingdom. The revolt spread quickly, gaining support in Zagreb, Sarajevo and Skopje, rendering Yugoslavia's adhesion to the Axis ineffective. With the new political landscape, Peter II was proclaimed king, although he had not yet reached the age of majority. The Serbian Democratic Party took over the government, causing discontent among other communities, especially the Croats. But the most serious problem came with Germany's reaction. In Serbia, thousands took to the streets with British flags and even attacked the German ambassador's car. Furious at what he considered a betrayal, Adolf Hitler ordered the immediate punishment of Yugoslavia with an invasion. The Simovic government soon realized that the German response was inevitable. They tried to calm the situation by assuring Berlin that they would not join the Allies, but no one believed them. Facing imminent danger, they turned to the United Kingdom for reinforcements. However, the promised help did not arrive. The British, busy with the advance of the Afrika Korps in Egypt, only managed to send some troops to Greece. Feeling deceived, Simovic refused to meet with British Foreign Minister Anthony Eden on March 30th. Nevertheless, on April 1st, he met with General John Dill and Greek commander Alexandros Papagos to plan a possible defense against the imminent German attack. The Royal Yugoslav Army had 31 divisions deployed in the Balkans, most of them infantry and some cavalry. These units were organized into different military groups, with independent formations that included several strategic forces. Although the soldiers were well trained and had modern equipment, the ethnic diversity within the troops generated internal conflicts. Many saw the war as an opportunity to desert or even join the Axis. Regarding armor, the equipment was old and limited. Of the 172 tanks of the 1st Armored Battalion, 110 were Renault FT-17s from World War I, while the remaining 54 consisted of French Renault R-35s and 8 SIDs of Czechoslovak origin, all obsolete models. In contrast, the Royal Yugoslav Air Force had a more varied fleet, with aircraft from different generations. Despite having older models, they also operated Messerschmitt Bf-109 fighters and Dornier Do-17 bombers acquired from Germany, as well as British Blenheim twin-engine aircraft. The Royal Yugoslav Navy, Jugoslovenska Kraljevska Mornarica, based in Adriatic ports, had a small fleet compared to the Italian Navy. Its main ship was the light cruiser Dalmatia, accompanied by destroyers and submarines distributed in bases in Dalmatia and Montenegro. In total, the Yugoslav forces amounted to 850,000 soldiers, 172 tanks, and 623 aircraft, divided among fighters, bombers, transports, and training aircraft. Their naval fleet consisted of 53 ships, including 1 cruiser, 5 destroyers, 4 submarines, several torpedo boats, minesweepers, gunboats, and 1 seaplane tender. Operation Punishment, the Axis strategy to defeat Yugoslavia. Under the name Operation Punishment, or Directive Number 25, Germany prepared the invasion of Yugoslavia for early April 1941. The strategy consisted of attacking from different points using military bases in Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria. With this deployment, the Yugoslav forces would be surrounded on several fronts, allowing the Germans to advance without encountering significant resistance. In this way, they would open a path in Slovenia, Serbia, Croatia, and Nis, gradually cornering the enemy until forcing the surrender of the government in Belgrade. The German Second Army, under the command of Maximilian von Weichs, was positioned between Austria and Hungary, while the 12th Army, led by Wilhelm List, was deployed in Bulgaria and Romania. From there, the Germans would advance over Slovenia and Croatia, securing control of the Sava River and then continuing toward Bosnia. In parallel, another attack group would push toward Belgrade and occupy Kosovo and Macedonia, taking the most important cities. At the same time, another part of the army would head to Nice and the Vardar Pass, aiming to link up with the invasion of Greece in the so-called Operation Marita. In addition to Germany, other Axis powers participated in the attack. Hungary, led by Miklos Horthy, agreed to join the offensive in exchange for the region of Vojvodina. However, Prime Minister Pál Teleki, who defended the Pact of Friendship with Yugoslavia, took his own life upon seeing his country break the agreement. For his part, Mussolini supported the invasion with the hope of annexing Dalmatia and the Adriatic Islands, territories that Italy had not been able to recover after World War I. Bulgaria, under Tsar Boris III, joined with the intention of recovering Upper Macedonia, while Albania, influenced by Italy, sought to expand toward Kosovo. Romania, governed by Ion Antonescu, did not send troops directly, but allowed the Germans to use their strategic bases in Timisoara. Italy, after Germany, was the country that contributed the most troops to the invasion. From the Julian Alps, an Italian army advanced towards Slovenia and southwestern Croatia, while another group incursioned into Montenegro and Macedonia from Albania. Hungary also played an active role, sending troops to northern Serbia. Bulgaria deployed military units in the Enias area, and Albania contributed with its fascist militia to support the Albanian community in Kosovo. Meanwhile, Romania collaborated with artillery and military sections at strategic points. In total, the Axis forces gathered approximately 700,000 soldiers. Of these, 337,000 were Germans, 250,000 Italians, 100,000 Hungarians, 15,000 Bulgarians, 5,000 Albanians, and 1,000 Romanians. In terms of equipment, the Axis bloc had 875 tanks and 1,756 aircraft, most of them in the hands of Germany and Italy. Execution of the plan, the fall. During the early hours of April 6, 1941, a base of the Yugoslav army, located about 128 kilometers from Belgrade, detected enemy aircraft flying over the border with Hungary. With no possibility of reaction, around 150 German aircraft under the command of General Alexander Löhr, of Romanian origin, along with some Italian units, reached the Serbian capital. A group of 50 Stuka dive bombers led the attack, dropping incendiary charges in the city center. At the same time, Messerschmitt Bf 109 fighters and Messerschmitt Bf 110 bombers attacked the Zemun airfield, where they destroyed 50 Yugoslav aircraft on the ground, including 26 Dornier Do-17 bombers and other older models. Meanwhile, Heinkel He-111 and Dornier Do-17 bombers unloaded their arsenal on various strategic points, damaging the royal palace of Dedinje, the topsider barracks, the military academy, the railway station, the post office, and the air and navy ministries. Even the National Library of Serbia was set on fire, and the zoo suffered severe damage, allowing some animals to escape and run through the streets. The impact of the bombing was devastating, with avenues destroyed and hundreds of homes reduced to rubble, causing the death of 4,000 civilians. General Dusan Simovic, who days earlier had led a coup d'état, received news of the attack while attending his daughter's wedding a few kilometers from the capital. He immediately returned to Belgrade and found it in ruins, with enormous craters in the streets. Upon reuniting with the General Staff at the Ministry of War, one of the few buildings still standing, it was agreed to move the government to the city of Uzice. However, from their new headquarters at the Hotel Palace, the administration could not exert any control. Constant bombings cut almost all communications, except for one line with Belgrade, and the Croatian faction led by Vladko Maček of the Croatian Peasant Party disappeared without a trace. That same day, German troops crossed the border with Yugoslavia from Bulgaria, quickly advancing through Macedonia and adding reinforcements from Bulgarian units. Along the way, a regiment of the Waffen-SS eliminated resistance at the Kriva Palanka Pass, took Kumanovo, and captured Strumica. Then, diverting south, they headed toward the border with Greece to participate in the invasion of the Hellenic country, which began in parallel under the name Operation Marita. To the north of Yugoslavia, on the border between Vojvodina and Hungary, the gunboats Drava, Sava, Morava and Vardar of the Royal Yugoslav Navy sailed the Danube after detecting enemy presence. In retaliation, they fired several shots at the Hungarian city of Mohacs, causing damage. This led the Hungarian Third Army to respond with artillery fire, and Budapest immediately declared war on Belgrade. Meanwhile, on the border of the Banat Serbian with Romania, units of the 41st Motorized Corps based in Timisoara, along with artillery equipped with pieces of various calibers, attacked Yugoslav positions. Some were destroyed, but Belgrade's reaction was swift. 2 Blenheim bombers attacked the Romanian city of Arad, although both were shot down. On April 7th, the second day of the offensive, the German 12th Army crossed the Vardar and occupied almost all of Macedonia. In Skopje, the regional capital, more than 20,000 Yugoslav soldiers, including several generals, were captured. Parallel to this, the Italian Second Army crossed from the Julian Alps toward Slovenia, encountering little resistance. They advanced rapidly and secured the Sava Valley, Kastav, and the summit of Mount Pek. By April 8th, they already dominated Kranjska Gora, Zavratek, and Godz. While the Italian forces advanced without problems in Slovenia, the story was different in Albania. After months of wear and tear from the war with Greece, the Italian Ninth Army could not join the offensive, and instead suffered an onslaught from the Yugoslav Third Army. Its troops broke through the defensive lines, advanced through the Gusinje and Prokletije mountains, took control of the Škoda road, and snatched Debar from the Italians and their Albanian allies. To the east, on April 8th, the 14th Panzer Corps crossed the Serbian border, overcame the Nizava, and devastated the Yugoslav defenses in Pirot. This led to the collapse of several units of the Belgrade army, allowing the Germans to take Nis without obstacles. Further south, the XL Panzer Corps, with the support of the Bulgarian Fifth Army, secured control of Macedonia, seizing Stip, Veles, Prilep, and Monastir. In contrast, the Italian Ninth Army in Albania continued to lose ground. The Yugoslavs advanced on the Drin River and captured Valjbone and Koljegava, further weakening the Roman troops. Nevertheless, on the Slovenian front, the Italian Second Army maintained its victorious streak. After crossing the Krkno Mountains and the Regesina River, they expelled the Yugoslavs from Kalce and Logatec, consolidating their dominion in the region. The collapse of Yugoslavia, the fall in only 12 days. On April 9, 1941, the offensive of the German Second Army began from Austria with the aim of advancing on Slovenia. While the troops erupted into the Slovenian territory from Styria, groups of the German minority Volksdeutsche in Maribor took control of the situation. Armed with pistols and shotguns, they seized government buildings and disarmed the Yugoslav guards. Thanks to this action, the German advance was rapid, and the city fell into the hands of the LI Corps without resistance. Additionally, they facilitated the crossing of the Drava River by securing several bridges, allowing armored forces to cross without setbacks. On April 10th, the 46th Panzer Corps opened a new front in Yugoslavia by crossing the border from Hungary toward Croatia. With armor at the forefront, the Germans managed to take several key localities in a short time, leaving many Yugoslav troops trapped on the Budapest-Trieste railway line. In just one day, the advance exceeded 100 kilometers with minimal opposition, as some Croatian units of the Yugoslav army rebelled and facilitated the occupation of Zagreb in a matter of hours. Until that moment, Croatia had not been an active part of the Axis offensive, but the situation changed when a call from Rome by the fascist leader Ante Pavelić incited insurrection. Many Croatian units mutinied, capturing their own Serbian officers and handing over key cities to the Germans. In Bielova, the revolt allowed the new mayor to proclaim the country's independence. In Bosnia-Herzegovina, Croatian nationalists and pro-German Bosnian groups clashed with the Yugoslav army, managing to take Mostar and the nearby airfield, where they captured several bombers that would later be used by the new Croatian aviation. Meanwhile, in the Nis region, the German forces of the 14th Corps advanced without resistance, leaving thousands of Yugoslav soldiers with no way out. After securing the Morava Valley, they took Partisan and Kragujevac, completely isolating thousands of soldiers in Leskovac, who eventually surrendered without a fight. Despite the success of the Axis forces on various fronts, the situation in Albania was different. There, the Italian Ninth Army continued to retreat in the face of the advance of the Yugoslav Third Army, which managed to penetrate 50 kilometers into enemy territory. The city of Škoda fell into their hands, and the Yugoslav aviation bombed the Italian naval base in Durrës, marking the high point of their offensive in the area. On April 11, 1941, another front opened in Yugoslavia when German troops crossed from Romania toward Serbia. Supported by mechanized units and Romanian detachments, they advanced rapidly, securing Tomisvar and capturing an airfield where they found 3 intact Yugoslav fighters. The speed of the attack was so impressive that, in less than a day, they reached Vršac and Pančevo, even reaching the outskirts of Belgrade. Meanwhile, in Slovenia, the Italians continued their offensive, taking Susak and Kraljevica before 2 battalions of elite troops entered Ljubljana aboard trucks. At the same time, in Albania, the situation took a turn. After having been in retreat, the Italians managed to deceive the Yugoslav forces with a false telegram that led them into an ambush. With the terrain in their favor, they initiated a counter-offensive that expelled the Yugoslavs from Albania, particularly punishing one of their divisions that was attacked with tankettes near the Pronisat River. In Croatia, the Yugoslav army faced serious difficulties. The Germans quickly took strategic points such as Slatina and Nosis, as well as seizing Osijek, a key position to access Serbia. The situation worsened due to uprisings by Croatian groups, who, together with fascist militias, disarmed Yugoslav units and took several cities, including Kapljina, Trebinje, and Bileka. The next day, April 12th, Hungary joined the invasion by crossing the border with Vojvodina. Advancing in 3 different directions, their troops took Semum, captured Batska, and reached Drave, although their progress was temporarily halted in Novi Sad, where the Serbian population, armed with whatever they had, tried to resist. In other parts of the country, the Axis offensive continued unabated. After annihilating Yugoslav units in Osijek, the Germans advanced with surprising speed, taking Mitrovica, Lazarevac, Zvornik, Valjevo, Sisak, and Bihać. Further west, other units cleared the Ničava Valley and reached the summit of Mount Avala. Meanwhile, the Italians took Karlovac and Senj and landed troops on Adriatic islands. At sea, the Yugoslav fleet was trapped in the ports by Italian naval superiority, and the German Air Force sank the gunboat Drava in the Danube, causing 121 casualties. In the late afternoon of April 12th, 1941, advance units of the 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich reached the outskirts of Belgrade. A group led by Captain Fritz Klingenberg decided to take a risky operation. They crossed the Danube in a motorboat, managing to land undetected by the Yugoslav guards. Once inside, they took advantage of the confusion to move through the city without resistance, disarming the local forces and taking the city hall. There, only 6 soldiers managed to depose Mayor Jevrim Tomic and replace him with Ivan Milicevic, who ordered the surrender of the garrison. By midnight on April 12th to 13th, all of Belgrade was under the control of the German 12th Army. On April 13th, the German offensive decreased in intensity, but their allies continued to advance. Italian troops in Slovenia took Otočac and Gradac, while in Albania, Axis forces began their advance into Montenegro, expelling what remained of the Yugoslav Third Army near Lake Scutari. In Vojvodina, Hungarian soldiers engaged in urban combat in Novi Sad, although they managed to take center and secure Baranja. On April 14th, the situation worsened for Yugoslavia. Italian units occupied Knin, while the Hungarians secured complete control of Vojvodina with the capture of Novi Sad. Facing this scenario, King Peter II and his government, who had moved the provisional capital to Pale, decided to flee. They first traveled to Knin in Montenegro, then to Athens in Greece, and finally reached Cairo, where the United Kingdom offered them refuge. The next day, April 15th, an attempt was made to evacuate what remained of the Royal Yugoslav Air Force. 18 aircraft managed to depart for Egypt, but 5 bombers were destroyed in a German air raid on the Paramysia airfield in Greece. Meanwhile, on the ground, the Axis advance continued without resistance. German troops from Croatia entered Bosnia-Herzegovina, capturing Banja Luka, Travnik, Zenica, and Sarajevo. Parallel to this, the German 12th Army seized Valjevo and crossed the Drina River, while the Italians in southern Croatia took Gospic, Sebemko, Split, Šibenik, and Metkovic. Montenegro, until then less affected by the invasion, suffered a decisive blow on April 16th. Italian troops crushed the Yugoslav Third Army and captured Podgorica. They then advanced toward Nikšić and joined with Croatian insurgents in Trebinje. To the southeast, on the border with Albania, Italian soldiers occupied Macedonia, taking Debar, Ohrid, Struga, and Bitola, while in Kosovo, with the support of the Albanian militia, they captured Prizren. By April 17th, most of the country was under Axis control, except for the Adriatic coast, where the last battles were fought. From the east, Italian forces advanced on Cetinje and the port of Kotor, where the Yugoslav navy scuttled its own ships to prevent them from falling into enemy hands. From the west, a battalion of blackshirts seized Dubrovnik, later renamed Ragusa. With the situation completely collapsed, on April 17th, General Danilo Kalafotiv requested a ceasefire. However, as he did not have the authority to negotiate, Alexander Chinkar Markovic, former Minister of Foreign Affairs, was brought to Belgrade to sign the unconditional surrender of Yugoslavia. From that moment, the entire territory fell under the domination of the Axis forces. Jasenovac, the hell of the Balkans and the massacres of Serbia. When Yugoslavia disintegrated in April 1941, some regions declared their autonomy. Among them were the independent state of Croatia, Montenegro, and the Serbian Salvation National State. In the latter, a regime subordinated to the Third Reich, led by Milan Nedic, adopted measures inspired by Nazi ideology. On April 30th of that year, Nedic signed the Decree on Racial Origin, isolating the 16,000 Jews living in the territory. However, the first killings in Serbian territory were not the work of Nedic's authorities, but of the Croatian army and the Ustaša militia, which, in their advance on Sirmia, executed hundreds of Jews in the area of the Sava River and the Banat. Others were sent to Jasenovac, an extermination camp where heinous crimes were committed during World War II. In this context, Jasenovac became the epicenter of terror in the Balkans. Operated by the Ustaša regime within the independent state of Croatia, this concentration and extermination camp located at the confluence of the Sava and Una rivers, was the third largest in Europe, and the only one in the region run by a collaborator government. From its founding in August 1941 until its dissolution in April 1945, Jasenovac witnessed atrocities beyond imagination. Unlike Nazi camps, it did not have gas chambers or industrialized mass extermination methods. Instead, executions were carried out individually and brutally, using knives, hammers, axes, or point-blank shots. The main victims were Serbs, within the framework of genocide against their people, followed by Jews, Roma, and political opponents. The camp consisted of a complex of 5 subcamps extending over 210 square kilometers along both banks of the Sava and Una rivers. The largest of them was the so-called brick factory, located 100 kilometers from Zagreb. There were also other sectors, such as Stara Gradiška, Gradina Donja, 5 forced labor farms, and the Roma camp of Ustica. The exact number of victims remains a subject of debate, but the most accepted figures indicate that around 100,000 people were killed in Jasenovac between 1941 and 1945, making it one of the deadliest extermination camps of World War II. Sajmist, the camp of death and the gas truck that erased the Jews of Serbia. Belgrade, the Serbian capital, had the largest Jewish population in Yugoslavia, making it the first target of the Third Reich and the government of Milan Nedic. In March 1942, units of the SS and auxiliary Serbian forces under the command of Harold Turner captured the city's Jews. The men were executed immediately, while women and children were detained in an internment camp within Sajmiste. On May 9, 1942, the prisoners of Sajmiste were killed in a sealed truck sent from Berlin, in which carbon monoxide was released, asphyxiating everyone inside. After the elimination of women and children, the extermination of the patients of the Belgrade hospital and the former Jewish military personnel who had belonged to the Royal Yugoslav Army was ordered. Approximately 8,000 Jews from Belgrade were executed in Sajmiste. The official Harold Turner, responsible for the massacre, even boasted to his SS superiors, "Serbia is the only country in Europe where the Jewish problem has been solved." Outside of this episode, there were no massacres of such magnitude in the Serbian Salvation National State due to restrictions imposed by Milan Nedic. However, Jews and Roma were separated from the local population and sent to various concentration camps, where thousands more died due to inhumane conditions. By the end of 1944, the Axis forces withdrew and the Soviet Union took control, reintegrating Serbia into Yugoslavia. By that time, 14,500 Serbian Jews had been killed by Germans, Croats, and some Serbian collaborators, resulting in the disappearance of 90% of the country's Jewish community. Tito and his partisans, the greatest anti-fascist resistance in Europe. The Yugoslav partisans, officially known as the National Liberation Army and partisan detachments of Yugoslavia, were a communist resistance movement that fought against the Axis forces, mainly the Nazis, in Yugoslav territory during World War II. Led by Josip Broz Tito, they were considered the most effective anti-fascist force in Europe during that conflict. Initially, they operated as a guerrilla, but over time, they transformed into an organized army that reached about 650,000 combatants by the end of 1944. Their main goal was to expel the invaders and establish a socialist state that integrated all the ethnicities of Yugoslavia. After the invasion of the country in April 1941, Tito took the initiative and formed this movement. The guerrilla offensive gained strength after Germany attacked the Soviet Union in June. By July, a large-scale rebellion had already broken out, with the initial participation of the Chetniks led by Draža Mihailović, leading to the proclamation of the short-lived Republic of Užice. Despite numerous Axis offensives, the partisans managed to resist, always remaining on the move under Tito's leadership. By the end of 1943, the Allies decided to withdraw their support for Mihailović and back Tito, upon discovering that the Chetniks were collaborating with the enemy. At the Tehran conference, the partisans were officially recognized. A year later, in the fall of 1944, Tito's troops, with the help of the Red Army, managed to liberate Belgrade. By the end of the conflict, the partisans had taken control of the country and even of areas such as Trieste and Carinthia. When the war ended, this resistance transformed into the armed forces of the newly established Federal People's Republic of Yugoslavia. The movement had two main objectives. The first was to confront the occupying troops. Until 1944, when they began to receive sufficient British support, the only weapons they obtained came from the invaders themselves. The second purpose was to establish a federal communist state where different ethnicities could coexist. To achieve this, the Communist Party sought to attract all the groups that made up Yugoslavia, ensuring that each community maintained its rights. On the other hand, the rival movement, the Chetniks, had very different interests. They wanted to preserve the monarchy, protect the Serbian population, and create a greater Serbia by expelling other groups from the regions they considered their own. From the beginning, there were tensions between the two factions, but in October 1941, the conflict escalated into open warfare. The Chetniks saw Tito's inclusive stance as a threat to the Serbs, while the Communists completely rejected their defense of the monarchical system. During the early years, most of the partisans were Serbs. At that time, Muslim and Croatian commanders had to change their names to avoid problems with their comrades. However, the situation changed after the retreat of German troops, driven by the Soviet and Bulgarian offensive in Serbia, North Macedonia, and Kosovo in the fall of 1944. From then on, more Serbs, Macedonians, and Albanians joined, significantly increasing the number of combatants. By the end of that year, the partisan army already had 650,000 men and women. By April 1945, that figure exceeded 800,000, consolidating it as one of the largest military forces of the conflict. The Kragujevac massacre, when the Nazis executed students and civilians for revenge. In 1941, in the midst of the German occupation of Yugoslavia, Hitler ordered a brutal reprisal against Serbia. His goal was to annihilate any resistance after the invasion, but what followed was an unthinkable massacre. For every German soldier killed, the Nazis executed 100 civilians, and for every wounded soldier, they shot 50. One of the bloodiest episodes of this extermination policy occurred in Kragujevac, Serbia, where thousands of people, including students, teachers, and innocent civilians, were killed in a matter of days. This massacre, although less remembered than other Nazi atrocities, was a ruthless attempt to crush Yugoslav resistance. It all began on Sunday, October 19th, in the outskirts of Kragujevac, the fourth largest city in Serbia after Belgrade. Located on the banks of the Lepenica River, the city stood out for its strong industry, especially in machinery and armament manufacturing. Between 1818 and 1839, it had been the first capital of modern Serbia and was the epicenter of the country's political, cultural, educational, and industrial life. In 1941, it had a population of 27,249 and was considered a bandit refuge by the Nazis, a term they used to refer to Serbian combatants. That Sunday, even before the norm that established the execution of 100 civilians for each German soldier killed and 50 for each wounded soldier was in force, 415 people were executed. The victims were captured in operations where the Nazis blocked access to the city from 3 neighboring localities. The next day, October 20th, German troops carried out a massive raid in the streets and homes of Kragujevac. Nearly 5,000 citizens were arrested to be selected and subsequently executed. They took men and youths from their homes, workplaces, factories, and public offices. They also stormed schools, where they arrested about 300 secondary school students, aged between 12 and 18, along with their teachers, including Lazar Pantelic, the director of the main boys' school in the city. Some historians argue that the number of detainees was even higher, reaching 7,000. Among them were young Romanians, mostly shoeshiners, who had refused to polish the boots of German soldiers. The Wehrmacht assured the captured that it was only a document verification and that they would be transferred to the barracks for control. However, few believed that version, Some, aware of the fate that awaited them, began to write farewell messages on pieces of paper torn from their notebooks, hoping that someone would find them. That day, 123 Serbian Jews, including several women, were shot. On October 21st, while the massacre continued, the German army posted and hung on the walls of the city a communiqué justifying the slaughter. The cowardly and treacherous attacks against our soldiers during the past week, in which 10 were killed and 26 wounded, had to be punished. For each German soldier killed, 100 people were shot. For each wounded, 50. Most of them were communists, criminals and collaborators. In total, 2,300 people were executed. Any new act of sabotage or attack will be answered with equal severity. The Nazis documented the reprisal. The surviving images of the horror show impactful scenes. Among the 144 students who were executed along with their teachers, many were shot with their eyes covered, some with their hands intertwined. It is said that several of them bravely shouted, "We are young Serbs, shoot," just before being gunned down. Others lost their lives in remote paths or against walls that separated the river from the main avenue. In some photographs, German officers are seen delivering coup de grace shots to those already lying on the ground. There were also victims hanged from trees or lampposts in the central square, reminiscent of scenes from World War I. One of the images shows a young woman already hanged and a boy with a cap, terrified, about to receive the noose around his neck. The bodies of those who died in the field and the streets, many from heavy machine gun fire, were buried in mass graves. The task of digging and covering the corpses fell to prisoners who managed to survive and later testified in the Nuremberg trials. On October 20th, 10 days after the massacre, the German ambassador to Serbia, Felix Benzler, sent a report to Berlin. In his concise and direct message, he stated, "Last week, mass executions of Serbs were carried out in Kraljevo and Kragujevac in retaliation for the killing of Wehrmacht soldiers, applying the ratio of 100 Serbs for each German. In Kraljevo, 1,700 people were shot, and in Kragujevac, 2,300. This diplomatic report confirms that Kragujevac was not the only city to suffer such atrocities. Simultaneous Nazi massacres in various localities raised the number of victims of German revenge to between 7,000 and 10,000. 50 kilometers away, in Kraljevo, at least one member of each family in the town was killed. The Wehrmacht devastated Rudnik, while Gornji Milanovac was destroyed by incendiary bomb attacks. Of its 464 homes, only 72 remained standing. In addition to Serbs, Romanians, Macedonians, Slovenes, Jews, Muslims and Christians were executed. The most recent investigations established that the exact number of fatalities in Kragujevac amounted to 2,778. This is recorded in the city's Memorial Park and the October 21st Museum, where farewell letters written by the condemned, along with their personal belongings and documents recalling the massacre, are preserved. One of the most important monuments in the city honors the memory of the executed students. In 2012, the National Assembly of Serbia decreed October 21st as a day of remembrance for the Serbian victims of World War II. The Nazi military officer Franz Böhmer was arrested in Norway at the end of the war. In the so-called subsequent Nuremberg trials, he was tried for the Kragujevac massacre and numerous war crimes committed by his troops in Serbia. On May 29, 1947, he threw himself from the 4th floor of the prison where he was being held. His remains rest in Graz, a city located in southern Austria. The silent extermination, the persecution of Germans in Yugoslavia. At the end of World War II, and in the early years of the Cold War, Yugoslavia carried out strong persecution against various ethnic minorities within its territory. The regime led by Josip Broz Tito promoted these measures against Croats, Slovenes, Montenegrins, Italians, and Hungarians, but one of the most affected communities was the 500,000 ethnic Germans, or Volksdeutsche, accused of having collaborated with the Third Reich. With the arrival of the Red Army in 1944 and the liberation of Belgrade, many Germans living in the region fell under the control of the Yugoslav partisans. From that moment on, with the support of some sectors of the local population, a wave of violence was unleashed against them. More than 7,000 people were killed in lynchings and mass shootings, including those who had opposed Nazism. An emblematic case was that of the priest Adalbert Schmidt, who was beaten to death by Yugoslav soldiers despite having helped many victims of the Nazi regime. On November 2, 1944, the Anti-Fascist Council for the National Liberation of Yugoslavia decreed that the German community was stripped of its nationality, losing all its civil rights and properties. Initially, these measures were applied in Maribor, where the majority of the population was German, but they later extended to all of Yugoslavia. With the occupation of Slovenia by the Popular Front, these dispositions also came into force in various Slovenian regions. On April 29, 1945, the Volksdeutsche were declared property of the state and reduced to the condition of slaves. Many were sold or assigned to individuals, and children were separated from their families according to the demand of those who acquired them. More than 200,000 people were forced to rebuild ruined villages and cities, while 47,000 were sent to the Soviet Union to work in the mines of the Donbass. To this were added the thousands of prisoners transferred to forced labor camps in various parts of the Balkans. Those who managed to avoid slavery faced an equally difficult fate. Stripped of their nationality, 313,000 Germans were expelled to different countries. Around 150,000 settled in Germany. The same number emigrated to Austria, while 10,000 managed to reach the United States and 3,000 to France. The consequences of this repression were devastating. 57,640 Germans lost their lives, of whom 48,447 died in labor camps. 7,199 were executed, and 1,994 perished on the way to the USSR. Additionally, most of the survivors were forced to abandon their homes, leaving the German community in Yugoslavia on the brink of disappearance. As the Cold War consolidated, the relationship between Tito and the Soviet Union deteriorated. In an attempt to balance his political position, the Yugoslav regime halted the deportations in 1950 and allowed 82,000 Germans to remain in the country, recovering their nationality and some of their rights. This decision prevented the total extinction of the German presence in the Balkans, although its impact on the region's history was irreversible. The persecution against the Volksdeutsche in Yugoslavia resulted in 57,640 deaths. Of that total, 48,447 perished in concentration camps or performing forced labor, 7,199 were shot, and 1,994 died during their transfer to the Soviet Union. To this were added 360,000 expelled, some forced to flee the country and others sold as slaves to the USSR, which practically eliminated the German community in the region. With the beginning of the Cold War, Yugoslavia broke relations with the USSR, and Josip Broz Tito, in his attempt to maintain the country in a neutral position, ordered the halt of deportations. Thanks to this decision, in 1950, 82,000 Germans managed to stay, recovering their nationality and becoming citizens with rights again, thus avoiding the complete disappearance of their people in the Balkans. The invasion of Yugoslavia in 1941 marked the beginning of one of the darkest chapters in the country's history. The fragmentation of the territory facilitated the implementation of genocidal policies by the occupiers and their local collaborators. In the independent state of Croatia, the fascist Ustaša regime carried out ethnic and religious cleansing of Serbs, Jews and Roma in extermination camps like Jasenovac. In Serbia, the German occupation immediately imposed anti-Semitic measures, and the Jewish community was almost annihilated through mass shootings and deportations. Resistance was not long in coming. On one side, the monarchist Chetniks, loyal to King Peter II, fought to restore the old Yugoslavia, while the communist partisans, led by Josip Broz Tito, promoted an anti-fascist struggle that also sought political and social transformation. Despite the brutality of the occupation, the war left Yugoslavia with a sense of unity around resistance, although the post-war period brought new tensions among its peoples. The Holocaust in Yugoslavia not only ended the lives of thousands of Jews, but also destroyed entire communities that had been an integral part of the country for centuries. The war and occupation demonstrated how hatred, extremism, and geopolitical ambitions can shatter a nation and take the lives of thousands of innocent people. Although the conflict ended in 1945 with the liberation of the country, the trauma and divisions generated by the occupation persisted for decades. How could a nation so diverse and rich in history fall into such atrocious destruction? The history of Yugoslavia during World War II serves as a warning about the consequences of intolerance and war.